Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the structural framing industry. Regardless of how you touch this industry, we're glad you're here. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, this is Abby Langenberg, Director of Business Development for the Structural Building Components Association. I will be your host for this episode of Component Connection. Joined always with me is our Executive Director, Jess Lohse. And today we are exploring SBCA's Component Craft, which is a new regional symposium series created to bring designers, inspectors, and code officials together to build clarity and confidence in structural components. Welcome, Jess, again.
Hey, thanks. It's getting the team back together.
Yes, it's been a little bit, it feels like. So before we jump into the logistics of Component Craft itself, where did the idea for Component Craft come from? Because it's not just another meeting, it's not just a conference. It was kind of created to solve some real gaps in how components are understood and applied in the field. So let's kind of start with the why behind this new symposium series.
So like a lot of things in the association world, it takes like years to, have an idea become a reality. And that's kind of the case with this one as well. With Component Craft, a couple of years ago, we were at our year-end board meeting and talking with our board of directors. And it was a very frank conversation and kind of talking about like, what do we need to do to help our component manufacturers, our members, and really our industry. And, it kind of came about, how do we talk to the specifiers, the people that, create the plans that become the houses that our members build the components for? So it was kind of that like, okay, well, how do we, influence? How do we persuade? How do we talk to you? How do we just have the conversation? And that's where really looking at it, we hear a lot of feedback on the quality of plans, as well as, maybe not thinking through how components could fully be utilized in projects. And from my perspective, that became an issue with education. And how do we, as an industry, work to educate people upstream in that design process to where we, as my friend Chris Tachi often says, how do we get a seat at that table? And that was really kind of using some of that perspective to build into it to where, like, okay, what are some ways? And yes, you could do traditional marketing, but people don't always like to be sold to. So it's kind of that education piece. And how do we go about that? And combine that with our knowledge center, which really we're trying to drive traffic to have the realization of all the materials that we've got for SBCA, and making sure that those specifiers, the residential designers, the architects, the engineers, the people that when they write trusses by others on their plans, we want more of that. But how do they understand the product that we manufacture to be able to do that more so and more confidently?
Yeah, so since this isn't necessarily an event designed for component manufacturers, who is the event designed for, and kind of what are attendees going to gain from attending Component Craft?
Yeah, and that, again, was another one of our meetings when I first kind of brought the topic up, and I could almost see the room deflate, like, oh my God, another event I have to go to, and it was component manufacturers on the supply side. And it was like, no, wait, this isn't for you. It's, to attend, it's for you to build a market share to do that. So it's really for those folks that are creating the plans or, enforcing the code, environment to understand the product better. Because, our component manufacturers and our suppliers were very close to our products, the trusses and panels, the roof trusses, the floor truss. We understand it very well. And we've talked to ourselves for decades now. So we understand it. It's not necessarily for us. It's for the people that are on the outside. And having dealt with that to where an architect, I can't tell you how many calls, and I'm sure it still happens today, of, people that are in the design phase, like, will a floor truss work here? Will a roof truss? What, so they don't have that familiarity. So it's kind of bridge that gap to where they can be confident that no matter what they specify or what they design into their plan, that the component manufacturer is going to be able to deliver on it. And most cases, yes, it can be done. but we want to increase that level of confidence to when the specifier does it to where they feel better about it.
So this event is 2 days, the first day at a craft brewery and the second day for a plant tour. So what makes the 2-day format unique, and kind of why do one at a brewery and then the plant tour?
So that's where kind of, imitation is a form of flattery. I forget exactly how the saying goes, but there's another group that is doing something similar in the building science space and really kind of benchmarked what they do and talked with some of their folks that, are putting on that event and asked them what worked, what doesn't, group size, that sort of stuff. And, there's some things that I like about having it at a craft brewery or, microbrewery, that setup is it's bespoke. It's not like you've got a chain of microbreweries, they're all fairly unique. They're local. So it's going to make it a unique experience. I can't tell you how many different education sessions I've gone to in hotel rooms, meeting rooms, they all feel the same and you don't know if you're in one city or another. This hopefully stands out in the memories of the attendees as being, okay, this is where I learned it. I'm going to equate it not only to what they learned, but also to SBCA as an association, but also our knowledge center, the things that we're going to promote to hopefully wrap that up. Now, beyond that, and kind of creating that unique learning environment, it's going to be tricky and there's going to be changes and challenges. And, that's why we have a team, and some things aren't going to go as great as they will in other places, but we'll be able to get the people together there. And it's kind of got that community feel already to where the networking and being able to interact with one another, that's the other part of it that we want to bring is the networking and getting people just talking about components, the trusses and what works and maybe what were some of the challenges and helping people through those challenges. So that community aspect of it is a big part of the brewery situation, which, people, it's kind of a relaxed setting. People are a little disarmed when they enter. So hopefully we're able to have some better conversations, contractually on the things to do there's some advantages, which I won't get too much into that, but that helps, the association be able to do this a little bit more affordably than maybe some other venues. But at the end of the day, if you kind of got that sudsy beverage, the cool one that you can look forward to, I think that'll help too, as well as that enforce that networking. And it'd be kind of neat to, have the curiosity on, you're going to spend all day in the brewery kind of smelling the things and kind of wondering, okay, well, what's that one taste like? So hopefully that keeps people engaged and able to, look forward to that towards the end. And I think the second part of your question is the plant tour. And that really is just kind of opening the door of showing people how cool it is, the things that we do, and being able to let them know the sophistication of our industry. And there's no better way than to show them and walk them through the plant. And hopefully we're able to kind of bring in some of the design aspects and all the work that the truss technicians do, in advance before the designs go to the shop. But once they do, just the sophistication in the different saws and bringing it all together, the just-in-time manufacturing, and and we're going to pick some fairly sophisticated, component manufacturing operations, but even the most, basic, ones that are using a lot of manual, that's still cool. And to do that, I don't think that the audience that we're intending Component Craft to be for fully understands that or the sophistication of our industry. So hopefully we're able to convey that, because I hear that from our component manufacturers too, that we need to tell people just how great we are. And this is part of that. And I brought it up in a different meeting this morning, our folks are very humble by nature. So this is getting out of the comfort zone. And this is hopefully the association be able to do it a little bit on their behalf, that where we build up the importance of the component industry and, showcase that sophistication to where the people in the supply chain up and down will respect it a little bit more and understand the value that we bring through seeing it in action.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that the setup isn't necessarily about just delivering the information. It's about creating the space for conversations that don't normally happen and being able to kind of show off what our industry does best. And I think, as we're looking forward, what does Component Craft hope to mean for the industry long term?
Well, yeah, you're hitting on it there. Is we're trying to craft an experience that's memorable and keeps people thinking about components long after they attend this event, and getting it more into their everyday usage they have options. There's a lot of different ways to, build a structure. And while I firmly believe components and the use of trusses and panels are, the best way to frame, as we say, but it's one of those trying to create that long-term, relationship with those people that are doing that. Now, where, we're not going to be able to touch every single person in the country, through a component craft, but we can start the discussion and we can start talking about the events and we can get people that want to be engaged and they enjoy the event. They want to come back and they want to learn more. And that's where we're looking for those first movers, the ones that are kind of on the, not the bleeding edge, but the ones that want to be able to understand the things, the tools that are at their disposal a little bit better. And that's where hopefully we're able to build it into something that is a little bit more widespread. Now, will everybody need to attend every year? Maybe not. But in my wildest dreams, we're able to have this, in multiple cities a year, and people attend every few years and they're staying up and they're knowing what's going on with components, the changes on our, ANSI standard and the codes, and they're really on top of everything which we want. And, ultimately that's going to be better for our component manufacturers because we want to capture additional market share. And it's not just about the singular roof truss. It's about capturing additional market share for the floor system, whether it's a cassette or a floor truss, but also our wall panels as we continue to add value there and being able to utilize that systems effect of all three. That's where we want those designs to be built around that solution, as opposed to viewing a wall panel as a substitution to a stick frame or a floor truss as a substitution to an alternative, whether it's a 2x10 or an I-joist. We want them to think about the component first when the building's going from an idea to something on paper.
So you touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the more specific misconceptions that component craft is aiming to clear up among the professionals of the building industry?
You hear about it, it's kind of regional, but a lot of places think that, the roof design is going to be too complicated for trusses, which I think we've got enough technicians in our industry that would tell you, blasphemy, we can truss almost anything. But if it's designed with the trusses in mind to begin with, then we don't even have that issue. But that's one of them, like what are the effectiveness of floor trusses? What can they do? What, should they not do? The wall panel and really the importance of that. And, part of it is creating a feedback loop as well to where we as an industry can say, hey, Miss Designer, Mr. Designer, could you do these things on your plans and make our jobs a little bit easier? Whether it's calling out a heel height or specifying the overhangs, in a number to where you don't have to scale it or guess or, take an estimated understanding of what it might be, things like that. And to make the plans a little bit better. And that is as much an opportunity for our component manufacturers to benefit from better plans to where they don't have to have as many RFIs or they don't have to assume certain things, because we know what happens when that start going down that road. But it's one of those to where those dialogues and that feedback loop to where I don't think anybody in the construction industry sets out to do a bad job. I think they just get so narrowly focused on their scope of work that they lose sight of what else is happening around them. If we're able to kind of just let them know that these things matter and that to articulate that, yes, we need foundations to be within a certain tolerance. We need them to be flat and square. We need the drawings to tell us these certain things. And that's the thing is, from our perspective as component manufacturers, we're very focused on the structural framing. We don't fully understand everything that the architect or the building designer or the residential designer, or even the engineer of record has to go through and what their considerations are. You start putting yourself in that mindset and you're like, holy cow, you got grade issues, you got finishes, you got all sorts of different things. And we're just a little piece of that. So hopefully we're able to consume a little bit more of that mindset in those designers' eyes as they're going to work, to where, okay, now it's a little bit better for our manufacturers to where we can perform better. And then ultimately, the products are more widely to be used or more acceptable. And then we're able to, sell more trusses and more wall panels.
So how could this increased alignment in including components ahead of time, keeping them in mind for design and even for that first steps of readying the job site for something to be built on it, how does that kind of help reduce friction on the job site? I know you touched a little bit on pre-design, what that looks like for those different alignments and how that reduces friction in that respect. But how do you think it can help on the job site?
Yeah. So, one of the things we've been talking a lot with our National Framers Council over the last several years is when you align the framer and the component manufacturer together, you're more likely to have a winning solution for the builder at the end of it. I see similar potential for the design side of things where, understanding when things need to come about, how they need to go into order. And part of that's going to be the component manufacturer altering some of his or her methods, the sequencing, that sort of stuff, but understanding and having a more robust and just better plan. And that starts with literally the plans that the designers are producing through whatever means. But that's, having that ahead of time is going to be helpful to where everybody's literally on the same page. And if that page has all the information they need, so it'll start from the design phase for when the truss technicians are going at it and putting their initial input to when it goes to manufacture, to how it gets delivered to the job site, to, what the expectations are. And there's different projects, and the building designer might be involved at that point. They might have moved on, but, ultimately the builder is going to benefit from more collaboration up and down the supply chain, as well as the building owner, whoever that might be, if it's a corporation with a build for rent or a apartment complex, or a family that, is a little bit, they're able to move in a month early or whatever because of all of the things that went into it with better planning. And that's kind of, knocking down some of the silos and putting together some of that value chain to where everybody benefits. And, the component manufacturer is a great party to partner with throughout that project, just because everything they do, everything they put into their software has to be accurate. And hopefully we're able to drive a little bit of accountability with that design phase too, to where, this is where it is. And, the more people work together, the better they'll get at what they're doing.
Absolutely. So our first component craft will be in Austin, Texas. So why Austin first, and kind of what locations or maybe regions are we focusing on for the future?
Yeah. So Austin is an interesting location. I don't know if you would, throw a dart at the map and hit Austin out of the gate, but, one thing we are doing is we have our open quarterly meeting, which is meant for component manufacturers and our suppliers and our framers to attend that. So partnering with those two events allows us to mitigate a little bit of risk from travel, from everything. And we're going to have staff already in Austin that week. So that helps us kind of, when I look at doing something new, it's, how risky is it? How do we, reduce that risk if we can? And in partnering it at the same time as the OQM or having a little bit of overlap definitely allows us to do that. Now, Texas is no secret. There's a ton going on there. It traditionally is year in, year out. And it's one of those that we should go to a hot market. And, I don't know if any market is really hot. I was just on with an economist earlier today, and we were talking about how there's pockets of, places that are doing well and not so well. But, Texas historically, in recent history, does really well. So we want to make sure that we have a presence there. But also you look at what components are utilized in Texas. And Austin, I think, is a little bit better about utilizing roof trusses, but Texas represents a huge opportunity for roof trusses. Now, floor trusses probably have a better share there than they do elsewhere. So we'll be able to learn from that, but then also wall panels and being able to deliver that. So it's a unique instance. And I think we're going to have some design folks that are in attendance that might not fully understand components. So I think it's right for that. So it's a combination of being able to mitigate some risk, be able to have, the greatest impact at the same time. And, it's one of those places that if you're going to travel, Austin isn't necessarily a bad place to go in February. And, it's a cool town. I've always enjoyed every opportunity I've had to go there. So hopefully if people are willing to travel and look to travel, Austin is one of those locations that they'd want to, travel to.
So if somebody is wanting to get involved as a speaker, a host, a partner, or maybe even send it to a person that they thought of while they were listening to this episode, what's the best way they can do that?
So visiting the website, I believe that's SBCA and you can sign up. We should have the opportunity to, if you're interested in speaking. And that's the other point, this is very curated by SBCA, that it's going to support components. We've had some people that are like, oh, I want to sell my product through you. It's not meant for that. It's meant for, kind of that pragmatic component manufacturing environment. We want to have very dynamic and persuasive speakers talk to those points. So like if you've got a widget that you want to sell, it's probably not, there might be some other opportunities, I can honestly talk to you and Abby that, on how to promote individual businesses and products. But it's one of those that, go to that SBCA componentcraft.com, sign up if you're interested in being a speaker, but also, this is an opportunity for component manufacturers. If you have a set of plans that you've been working on, you wish they were a little bit better, that's probably a candidate for attending this event. And whoever, they usually put their name on it. It might be worth sending it to them and saying, hey, this might be of interest. Not saying that their work is bad or anything, but it's one of those where there might be some opportunities for improvement. And it's about creating that feedback loop. And let's bring them into the ecosystem to where they understand components. And it's easier for our component manufacturers to do that design aspect of the job and to make it a little bit easier. And that's where hopefully we're able to solve that pain point, create those feedback loops, and then, make the overall industry just a little bit better through this process.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for listening to this episode of SBCA's podcast, Component Connection. If you enjoyed this episode or you were thinking about a certain someone in your industry during this episode, send it to them and stay up to date on what there is to know by subscribing to Component Connection on whatever podcast platform you use most. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, Abby.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com.